Tonight, we are going to travel through the greatest story ever told, the story of life on Earth. Our journey begins more than 4 billion years ago, on a young and violent planet unlike anything we know today. There were no animals, no forests, no oceans filled with fish, and certainly no humans. There was only a barren world of fire, rock, and endless change. Yet somehow, from this seemingly lifeless planet, the first living cells appeared. Over the billions of years that followed, life would transform the Earth. Tiny microorganisms would fill the atmosphere with oxygen. Strange creatures would emerge in ancient seas. Plants would conquer the land, giant forests would spread across the continents, and enormous dinosaurs would rule the planet for millions of years. We will witness catastrophic extinctions, dramatic evolutionary leaps, and the rise and fall of countless species. We will follow the story of life from the simplest microscopic organisms to the first mammals, the first primates, and eventually the emergence of our own species. This is a story measured not in years or centuries, but in billions of years. It is a story of survival, adaptation, and constant change. Above all, it is the story of how life evolved from its earliest beginnings into the extraordinary diversity we see today. So settle in, relax, and join me as we explore the complete evolution of life on Earth. And now our story begins at the very beginning. Chapter 1. The first life. More than 4.5 billion years ago, our planet was a very different place. There were no forests, no oceans filled with fish, no birds singing in the sky, and no animals walking across the land. There was not a single living thing anywhere on Earth. The world that would one day support millions of species was, at its beginning, a hostile and violent place. To understand the story of life, we must first travel back to a time before life existed at all. Our story begins approximately 4.6 billion years ago, when the solar system itself was forming. At that time, there was no Earth. Instead, a vast cloud of gas and dust drifted through a region of the Milky Way galaxy. This cloud, known as a solar nebula, contained the raw materials that would eventually become the Sun, the planets, the moons, and countless smaller objects. For reasons that scientists are still studying, part of this enormous cloud began to collapse under its own gravity. As it collapsed, it spun faster and faster. Most of the material gathered at the center, where immense pressure and heat eventually ignited nuclear fusion. The Sun was born. The remaining material formed a rotating disk around the young star. Within this disk, tiny particles collided and stuck together. Over millions of years, these particles became larger and larger, forming rocks, boulders, and eventually planet-sized bodies. One of those growing worlds was Earth. The young Earth was nothing like the blue planet we know today. Its surface was a hellish landscape of molten rock and constant destruction. Massive volcanoes erupted across the globe. Rivers of lava flowed across the surface. Giant asteroids and comets frequently slammed into the planet, releasing enormous amounts of energy. Temperatures were so extreme that no ocean could exist. No atmosphere suitable for life surrounded the planet. Earth was still under construction. For tens of millions of years, the young world endured relentless bombardment from debris left over from the formation of the solar system. Scientists call this period the Late Heavy Bombardment. Some impacts were so powerful that they reshaped entire regions of the planet. One collision may have been particularly important. According to the leading theory, a Mars-sized world known as Theia collided with the young Earth approximately 4.5 billion years ago. The impact was unimaginably violent. Huge amounts of material were blasted into space. Over time, much of this debris gathered together and formed the Moon. Without this ancient collision, Earth's history might have unfolded very differently. The Moon would become a stabilizing influence on our planet, helping regulate tides and contributing to conditions that would eventually benefit life. As millions of years passed, Earth gradually began to cool. The outer layer hardened into a solid crust. Volcanic activity remained intense, but the planet was becoming more stable. Water vapor released by countless volcanoes accumulated in the atmosphere. As temperatures slowly dropped, this vapor condensed into liquid water. Rain began to fall, and it fell for an extraordinarily long time. For millions of years, storms may have drenched the planet. Water collected in low-lying regions, forming the first oceans. For the first time in Earth's history, vast seas covered large portions of the surface. These ancient oceans would become the cradle of life. Yet the world was still strange by modern standards. The atmosphere contained very little oxygen. In fact, breathing the air of early Earth would be impossible for humans. Instead, the atmosphere likely contained large amounts of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, and other gases produced by volcanic activity. The oceans were different as well. The continents, if they existed at all in recognizable form, looked nothing like the continents of today. There were no plants, no animals, and no visible signs of life. And yet, somewhere within this seemingly barren world, something extraordinary happened. Life appeared. Exactly how this occurred remains one of the greatest mysteries in science. Scientists have developed several theories, but no one knows precisely how non-living chemistry became living biology. At some point, simple molecules began interacting in increasingly complex ways. The early oceans contained water and a variety of chemical compounds. Lightning storms, volcanic activity, and energy from the sun may have driven chemical reactions that produced more complicated molecules. Over time, some of these molecules may have developed the ability to copy themselves. This was a crucial step. Replication allows information to be passed from one generation to the next. Once self-replicating molecules existed, evolution could begin. Small differences would emerge. Some versions would survive longer, others would disappear. Natural selection, the process that would eventually shape all life on Earth, may have begun long before the first true cells appeared. Scientists have spent decades attempting to understand these early stages. Experiments have shown that many of the building blocks of life can form naturally under conditions similar to those of early Earth. Organic molecules, including amino acids, can arise without the involvement of living organisms. This suggests that the transition from chemistry to biology may not have been as impossible as it once seemed. Still, the exact path remains unknown. The first living organisms left few traces behind. They were tiny, simple, and soft-bodied. Unlike dinosaurs or mammoths, they left no bones to fossilize, yet evidence of their existence has survived. Some of the oldest known signs of life come from ancient rock formations in Australia and other parts of the world. These rocks contain structures called stromatolites. Stromatolites are layered formations created by communities of microorganisms. Even today, similar structures can still be found in a few locations around the world. Some fossil stromatolites are more than 3.5 billion years old. This means life appeared surprisingly early in Earth's history. Considering that the planet itself formed around 4.6 billion years ago, life may have emerged within 1 billion years, or perhaps even sooner. In geological terms, that is remarkably fast. The first organisms were almost certainly microscopic. They lived in the oceans and lacked the complexity of modern plants or animals. There were no eyes, no brains, no limbs, and no organs. Yet these humble cells possessed something extraordinary. They could reproduce. They could respond to their environment. Most importantly, they could evolve. Every living thing that exists today can trace its ancestry back to these ancient organisms. Every tree, every bird, every whale, every dinosaur that ever lived, and every human being who has ever walked the earth shares a connection to those distant ancestors. The entire history of life began with them. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth belonged exclusively to microscopic life. No giant creatures dominated the oceans. No forests covered the continents. Life remained small and simple. But beneath that apparent simplicity, profound changes were taking place. Tiny organisms were slowly transforming the planet itself. The atmosphere was changing. The oceans were changing. The conditions that would one day support complex life were beginning to emerge. The stage was being set for one of the most important events in Earth's history, an event that would dramatically alter the planet forever, an event driven by some of the smallest organisms that have ever lived. That story begins with a remarkable biological innovation, the ability to harness sunlight, and it will lead us into the next chapter of our journey. Chapter 2: The Oxygen Revolution. For hundreds of millions of years after life first appeared, Earth remained a very different world from the one we know today. The oceans were inhabited only by microscopic organisms. The continents were barren and lifeless. No plants grew on land. No animals swam through the seas. No forests covered the landscape. Most importantly, there was almost no oxygen in the atmosphere. To modern humans, oxygen is essential. Every breath we take delivers oxygen to our cells, allowing our bodies to produce the energy needed to survive. But for the earliest life forms, oxygen was not necessary. In fact, many of them would have found it poisonous. The first organisms evolved in an oxygen-poor world and were adapted to conditions that seem alien to us today. For a long time, life remained relatively simple. Tiny microbes drifted through ancient oceans, feeding on chemicals in their environment. Some lived near volcanic vents deep beneath the sea, while others occupied shallow coastal waters warmed by sunlight. Then, sometime more than 3 billion years ago, a remarkable innovation appeared. Certain microorganisms evolved the ability to capture energy directly from the sun. Today we call this process photosynthesis. It would become one of the most important biological developments in Earth's history. Photosynthesis allowed organisms to use sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into food. As a byproduct, they released oxygen. The organisms responsible were tiny microbes known as cyanobacteria. Despite their simple appearance, cyanobacteria would transform the entire planet. At first, the oxygen they produced did not accumulate in the atmosphere. Instead, it reacted with substances in the oceans. Ancient seas contained large amounts of dissolved iron. Whenever oxygen encountered this iron, chemical reactions occurred, causing the iron to rust. Over immense periods of time, these reactions produced vast deposits of iron-rich rock. Even today, many of the iron ores used by modern industries originated during this period of Earth's history. For millions of years, cyanobacteria continued releasing oxygen. Gradually, more and more of it entered the oceans. Eventually, the oceans could absorb no more. Oxygen began escaping into the atmosphere. At first, the changes were subtle, but over time they became profound. Scientists call this event the Great Oxygenation Event. It occurred roughly 2.4 billion years ago and fundamentally altered the course of life on Earth. The consequences were enormous. To us, oxygen seems beneficial. For many early organisms, however, it was a deadly poison. Countless species had evolved in an environment without free oxygen. Their biological systems were not designed to handle it. As oxygen levels rose, many of these ancient microbes faced a crisis. Entire ecosystems disappeared. Some organisms survived only in isolated environments where oxygen remained scarce. Others vanished completely. In a sense, the Great Oxygenation Event was one of the first major extinction events in Earth's history, and it was caused by life itself. The very organisms that benefited from photosynthesis were altering the environment in ways that proved catastrophic for many other forms of life. It was an early example of a pattern that would repeat throughout Earth's history. Living things change their environment, and those changes create new opportunities while destroying old ones. Yet while oxygen posed a threat to some organisms, it also created extraordinary possibilities. Oxygen is highly reactive. This property makes it extremely useful for producing energy. Organisms that evolved ways to use oxygen could extract far more energy from food than earlier life forms. This increased efficiency would eventually make complex life possible. The rise of oxygen therefore represented both destruction and opportunity. It closed one chapter of Earth's history and opened another. The atmosphere itself was changing dramatically. Before the Great Oxygenation Event, the sky of ancient Earth may have looked very different from today's sky. The chemistry of the atmosphere was unlike anything modern humans have experienced. As oxygen accumulated, new chemical processes began shaping the planet. One particularly important consequence occurred high above the surface. Some oxygen molecules combined to form ozone. This ozone accumulated in the upper atmosphere, creating what we now call the ozone layer. Today, the ozone layer acts as a protective shield. It absorbs much of the sun's harmful ultraviolet radiation before it can reach the surface. Without this protection, life on land would be extremely difficult. The development of the ozone layer therefore represented another crucial step in preparing Earth for future evolutionary advances. Yet, despite these changes, the world remained dominated by microscopic life. For more than 1 billion years after the Great Oxygenation Event, there were still no dinosaurs, no mammals, no birds, and no trees. Life existed almost entirely at the microscopic level. This immense stretch of time is difficult to comprehend. If Earth's history were compressed into a single day, complex animals would not appear until very late in the evening. For most of the planet's existence, microbes ruled the world. But these microbes were not standing still. Evolution continued. Tiny changes accumulated over millions of generations. New biological innovations emerged. cells became more sophisticated. One of the most important developments involved cooperation. At some point, certain cells began living inside other cells. Rather than competing, they formed partnerships. The smaller cells provided energy, while the larger cells offered protection. Over time, these partnerships became permanent. The descendants of these ancient collaborations still exist inside your body today. Structures known as mitochondria, found within nearly every human cell, are believed to be the descendants of ancient bacteria that entered into such relationships billions of years ago. This idea, known as endosymbiosis, is one of the most remarkable concepts in biology. It suggests that complex life was built through cooperation as much as competition. The cells that emerged from these partnerships were larger and more capable than earlier forms of life. Scientists call them eukaryotic cells. Unlike the simpler cells of bacteria, eukaryotic cells contain specialized internal structures that perform different functions. Plants, animals, fungi, and humans are all made from eukaryotic cells. Their appearance marked a major turning point in the history of life. Complexity was increasing. The foundations for future life forms were being established. Yet another challenge remained. Most organisms still existed as single cells. They lived independently, carrying out all the functions necessary for survival on their own. The next great leap would occur when cells began working together in larger groups. Some organisms evolved ways for multiple cells to cooperate. Instead of acting alone, cells specialized in different tasks. Certain cells focused on gathering nutrients. Others provided structure or protection. This division of labor created entirely new possibilities. Multicellular life had begun to emerge. At first, these organisms were simple. But over vast spans of time, multicellular life would become increasingly sophisticated. The stage was slowly being prepared for one of the most dramatic transformations in Earth's history. For billions of years, life had remained largely invisible to the naked eye. Soon, that would change. The oceans would fill with strange new creatures. Bodies would become larger and more complex. Predators and prey would appear. Evolution would accelerate in ways never seen before. The age of microscopic life was drawing to a close. A new era was about to begin. And in the next chapter, we will witness one of the greatest bursts of biological innovation the world has ever known: the explosion of complex life in the ancient seas. Chapter 3. The explosion of life. For most of Earth's history, life was simple. Tiny microorganisms dominated the planet for billions of years. They filled the oceans, transformed the atmosphere, and laid the foundations for everything that would come later. Yet, if an observer had visited Earth during those distant ages, they might have seen very little evidence of life at all. There were no fish swimming through the seas, no forests covered the land, no animals hunted, grazed, or burrowed. The world belonged to microbes. But beneath the surface, evolution was slowly preparing for something extraordinary. As oxygen levels increased and more complex cells evolved, new possibilities emerged. Life was becoming increasingly sophisticated. Single cells joined together to form multicellular organisms. Over countless generations, these organisms developed specialized tissues and structures. The pace of change remained slow by human standards, yet on geological timescales, a revolution was approaching. Around 600 million years ago, strange new life forms began appearing in Earth's oceans. Many looked unlike anything alive today. Some resembled flattened discs resting on the sea floor. Others looked like soft, leaf-shaped organisms swaying gently in underwater currents. These mysterious creatures belonged to a period known as the Ediacaran. Scientists are still debating exactly how many of them are related to modern animals. Some may represent evolutionary experiments that left no descendants. Others could be distant ancestors of familiar groups. What is certain is that life was becoming larger and more complex than ever before. The oceans were changing. Evolution was gathering momentum. Then, approximately 541 million years ago, one of the most remarkable events in biological history began. Scientists call it the Cambrian explosion. The name can be slightly misleading. The event did not occur overnight. It unfolded over tens of millions of years. Even so, compared to the immense stretches of time that preceded it, the change was astonishingly rapid. In a relatively short period, an incredible variety of animal forms appeared. Many of the major body plans found in modern animals emerged during this era. For the first time, the oceans became populated by creatures with eyes, shells, limbs, jaws, and complex behaviors. Evolution seemed to burst with creativity. The ancient seas filled with life. Imagine diving into a Cambrian ocean. You would not see dolphins, sharks, whales, or modern fish. Instead, the water would be filled with strange creatures unlike anything in today's world. One of the most successful animals was the trilobite. Trilobites were armored marine arthropods with segmented bodies and hard exoskeletons. Some were only a few centimeters long. Others grew much larger. They crawled across the sea floor, searching for food and avoiding predators. For hundreds of millions of years, trilobites would remain among the most successful creatures on Earth. Another remarkable animal was Anomalocaris. Its name means unusual shrimp, though it was far more impressive than that description suggests. Anomalocaris was one of the largest predators of its time. Growing up to 1 meter in length, it possessed large, grasping appendages, a circular mouth lined with sharp structures, and sophisticated eyes capable of detecting movement in the water. To smaller Cambrian animals, it must have been a terrifying hunter. The appearance of predators changed everything. Before predators evolved, many organisms faced little threat from being eaten. Now, survival required new strategies. Some animals developed hard shells. Others evolved armor. Many became faster or more agile. Predators and prey entered an evolutionary arms race that continues to this day. Each adaptation inspired a counter-adaptation. Each innovation created new challenges. Evolution accelerated. Eyes represented another revolutionary development. The ability to detect light and movement transformed life in the oceans. Organisms could now identify food, avoid danger, and navigate their surroundings more effectively. Natural selection strongly favored improved vision. Over time, eyes evolved into increasingly sophisticated structures. Some scientists have argued that the evolution of vision may have helped drive much of the Cambrian explosion itself. Once animals could see one another, entirely new ecological interactions became possible. The oceans became dynamic environments filled with competition, cooperation, and constant change. The Cambrian seas also hosted many creatures that seem almost alien today. One of the strangest was Opabinia. This unusual animal possessed 5 eyes and a long, flexible appendage extending from its head. Scientists initially thought the fossils had been reconstructed incorrectly because the creature looked so bizarre. Yet further discoveries confirmed its unusual anatomy. Another strange animal was Hallucigenia. Its body was covered with spikes and supported by multiple pairs of slender legs. When researchers first studied its fossils, they struggled to determine which side was up. The creature appeared so unusual that it seemed almost unreal. These animals remind us that evolution does not follow a predetermined plan. The history of life is filled with experiments. Some lineages flourish, others disappear. Many of the bizarre creatures of the Cambrian left no living descendants, yet they demonstrate the extraordinary diversity that evolution can produce. As the Cambrian period continued, ecosystems became increasingly complex. Different species occupied different ecological roles. Some filtered food from the water, others scavenged along the seafloor. Predators hunted active prey. Food webs grew more intricate. For the first time, Earth possessed ecosystems that began to resemble those of the modern world. The Cambrian explosion did not create every major group of animals instantly. Evolution continued throughout the following hundreds of millions of years. Yet this period established many of the foundations upon which future life would be built. The descendants of Cambrian animals would eventually give rise to fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. In a very real sense, the origins of much of modern animal life can be traced back to these ancient oceans. Life had become visible. It had become active. It had become diverse, but one important limitation remained. Almost all life still lived in the sea. The continents themselves were largely barren. Rocky landscapes stretched across the surface of the earth without trees, grass, flowers, or animals. No birds flew overhead. No insects buzzed through the air. No footprints marked the ground. The land remained an empty frontier, waiting to be explored. Yet evolution rarely leaves opportunities untouched. Some organisms would eventually venture beyond the safety of the oceans. The transition would be difficult. Life on land presented entirely new challenges. Organisms would need protection from drying out. They would need ways to support their bodies without the buoyancy of water. They would need methods of reproduction suited to a terrestrial environment. Overcoming these obstacles would require some of the most important innovations in evolutionary history. But once those challenges were solved, life would spread across the continents. The transformation of Earth would be profound. Forests would rise. Insects would flourish. The first vertebrates would leave the water behind. A new chapter in the story of life was about to begin. And for the first time, the living world would expand beyond the oceans and begin its conquest of the land. Chapter 4. Life conquers the land. For hundreds of millions of years, life was confined to the oceans. The seas teemed with an astonishing variety of creatures. Trilobites crawled across the seafloor, predators hunted in ancient waters, and ecosystems grew increasingly complex. Yet beyond the shoreline lay an empty world. The continents were vast, barren landscapes of rock and sand. No forests covered the hills. No animals wandered across the plains. No insects buzzed through the air. The land was silent. To modern eyes, it would have seemed strangely lifeless. And yet, this empty frontier offered enormous opportunities. There were no predators waiting on land, no competitors for food, no crowded ecosystems. For any organism capable of surviving outside the water, an entirely new world awaited. The challenge was immense. Life had evolved in the oceans. Water supported bodies against gravity, carried nutrients and prevented organisms from drying out. On land, all of these advantages disappeared. Any creature leaving the sea would face new dangers. Gravity would pull on its body without the support of water. The sun could dry it out. Reproduction would become more difficult. Simply surviving on land required entirely new adaptations. The first pioneers were not animals. They were plants. Around 500 million years ago, simple plant-like organisms began colonizing damp coastal environments. Their ancestors had lived in the water, where sunlight provided energy through photosynthesis. Gradually, some species evolved ways to survive brief periods outside the sea. At first, these early plants remained close to the shoreline. They lacked roots, leaves, and the structures we associate with modern vegetation. Yet they represented a revolutionary step. For the first time, life had begun establishing itself on land. Over millions of years, plants evolved increasingly sophisticated adaptations. They developed protective outer layers that reduced water loss. Structures resembling roots helped anchor them to the ground and absorb nutrients. Internal tissues evolved to transport water and food throughout the organism. These innovations allowed plants to spread farther from the water's edge. The transformation of Earth's landscapes had begun. As plants multiplied, they altered the environment around them. Their roots helped break apart rocks, contributing to the formation of soil. Dead plant material accumulated, enriching the ground with organic matter. The first terrestrial ecosystems were taking shape. With plants established on land, new opportunities emerged for animals. The earliest land animals were likely small arthropods, relatives of modern insects, spiders, and centipedes. These creatures possessed a major advantage. Their hard exoskeletons provided protection against drying out and offered structural support outside the water. Many probably lived in moist environments where they could avoid prolonged exposure to the harsh conditions of the open land. At first, their excursions onto land may have been brief, but over time, some species became increasingly adapted to terrestrial life. The continents slowly became populated by crawling creatures. As plants expanded, so did the diversity of animals. New ecological relationships emerged. Some animals fed on plants, others preyed upon smaller creatures. Food webs began forming on land just as they had previously formed in the oceans. Evolution was creating entirely new ecosystems. Among the most successful pioneers were insects. The ancestors of modern insects appeared hundreds of millions of years ago and rapidly diversified. Their small size, protective exoskeletons, and ability to reproduce quickly made them exceptionally adaptable. Even today, insects remain among the most successful groups of animals on Earth. During this ancient period, however, some insects achieved sizes that seem almost unbelievable. The atmosphere contained significantly higher levels of oxygen than it does today. This abundance of oxygen may have allowed insects to grow much larger than their modern relatives. Some dragonfly-like insects possessed wingspans approaching 70 centimeters. Giant millipedes stretched more than 2 meters in length. These creatures moved through landscapes unlike anything seen in the modern world. Meanwhile, plants continued evolving. Around 385 million years ago, some species began growing taller. Simple stems became more robust. Primitive trees appeared, roots penetrated deeper into the soil. The first forests emerged. These early forests transformed the planet. Towering vegetation altered local climates and provided habitats for countless organisms. The appearance of forests also influenced Earth's atmosphere by absorbing carbon dioxide and producing oxygen. Life was no longer merely adapting to the environment, it was reshaping the planet itself. Yet one important group of animals still remained largely tied to the water: the vertebrates. Fish had already become highly successful in the oceans and freshwater environments. Some possessed powerful jaws and sophisticated sensory systems. Others developed strong fins capable of navigating shallow waters. A few species would eventually give rise to one of the most significant evolutionary transitions in history: the movement of vertebrates onto land. Certain ancient fish lived in environments where water levels frequently changed. Shallow ponds sometimes dried out. Survival favored individuals capable of enduring difficult conditions. Over time, some fish evolved stronger, more muscular fins. These fins allowed them to push themselves through shallow water and muddy environments. One famous example is Tiktaalik, a creature that lived approximately 375 million years ago. Tiktaalik possessed characteristics of both fish and early land vertebrates. It had scales and fins, but its fins contained bones resembling the limbs of later animals. Its anatomy provides an important glimpse into the transition from aquatic to terrestrial life. Evolution rarely proceeds through sudden leaps. Instead, major changes occur through countless small modifications accumulated over immense periods of time. The ancestors of land vertebrates did not suddenly crawl onto shore one day. The transition unfolded gradually. Generation after generation, natural selection favored traits that improved survival in changing environments. Eventually, the first amphibians appeared. These animals could move on land, but they still depended heavily on water. Their eggs lacked protective shells and had to remain moist. Much of their lives remained connected to rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Nevertheless, amphibians represented a monumental achievement. For the first time, vertebrate animals had established themselves on land. The continents were becoming increasingly alive. Forests spread across vast regions. Insects filled the air. Amphibians explored swamps and riverbanks. The conquest of the land was well underway. Yet evolution was not finished. A new innovation would soon free vertebrates from their dependence on water. Some animals evolved eggs protected by durable shells. These eggs could survive in dry environments, allowing reproduction to occur far from lakes and rivers. The animals that possessed this adaptation became the first reptiles. This development opened enormous possibilities. Reptiles could venture into habitats inaccessible to amphibians. They could colonize drier regions and expand across the continents. Their descendants would eventually dominate the planet. Among those descendants would be some of the most famous creatures in Earth's history. The age of forests, insects, and amphibians had prepared the stage. A new era was approaching. An era that would belong to reptiles. And eventually to the giants we now call dinosaurs. Chapter 5. The Age of the Dinosaurs. Long before humans appeared, long before mammoths crossed icy plains, and long before birds filled the skies, the Earth belonged to another group of animals. For more than 160 million years, dinosaurs dominated the planet. Their reign lasted far longer than human civilization has existed, and far longer than our species has even been alive. When most people think of prehistoric life, they think of dinosaurs. They imagine towering giants, fearsome predators, and strange creatures roaming ancient landscapes. Yet the true story of the dinosaurs is even more remarkable than popular imagination often suggests. To understand their rise, we must first travel back more than 250 million years. At that time, the Earth was recovering from the greatest mass extinction in its history. Scientists call it the Permian-Triassic extinction. Sometimes it is simply called the Great Dying. An estimated 90% of marine species disappeared. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Many groups of land animals vanished as well. Life on Earth came closer to complete destruction than at any other known point in history. The causes remain debated, but massive volcanic eruptions likely played a major role. These eruptions released enormous amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, triggering dramatic climate changes. Oceans warmed. Habitats disappeared. Food chains collapsed. For millions of years afterward, the planet remained a difficult place for life. Yet extinction also creates opportunity. With so many ecological niches left vacant, surviving species began evolving into new forms. Among these survivors were small reptiles that would eventually give rise to the dinosaurs. At first, dinosaurs were not the dominant animals on Earth. During the early Triassic period, they were relatively small and often overshadowed by other reptile groups. Many were agile, fast-moving creatures rather than giants. For millions of years, they remained just one group among many. But evolution favored them. Dinosaurs possessed several advantages. Their limbs were positioned directly beneath their bodies, rather than extending outward to the sides, as in many earlier reptiles. This posture allowed for more efficient movement and greater endurance. They could travel farther and more effectively than many competitors. Gradually, dinosaurs diversified. Different species adapted to different environments and lifestyles. Some became predators, others became herbivores. Some remained small, others began growing to extraordinary sizes. By approximately 200 million years ago, dinosaurs had become the dominant land animals across much of the world. Their age had begun. The Earth they inhabited looked very different from today's planet. The continents were still joined together in a vast supercontinent known as Pangaea. Over time, this enormous landmass would slowly break apart, eventually forming the continents we recognize today. But during the early age of dinosaurs, much of Earth's land remained connected. This allowed many species to spread across vast distances. The climate was generally warmer than today. There were no polar ice caps. Forests, deserts, and floodplains stretched across the planet. Life flourished in a variety of environments. As millions of years passed, dinosaurs evolved into an astonishing diversity of forms. Some became among the largest animals ever to walk on land. The sauropods were the giants of the dinosaur world. These long-necked herbivores included species such as Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, and Argentinosaurus. Their size is difficult to comprehend. Some reached lengths greater than 30 meters. Others weighed as much as several dozen elephants combined. Their long necks allowed them to feed on vegetation high above the ground. Entire herds may have moved across prehistoric landscapes, consuming enormous quantities of plants. For many years, scientists wondered how such gigantic animals could exist, yet fossils continue to demonstrate that these giants were real. They were among the most successful herbivores in Earth's history. Where there are herbivores, predators eventually follow. The dinosaur world included many formidable hunters. One of the most famous was Allosaurus, a large predator of the Jurassic period. With sharp teeth and powerful jaws, it hunted some of the enormous herbivores that shared its environment. But perhaps no dinosaur has captured the public imagination more than Tyrannosaurus rex. Living near the end of the age of dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rex was one of the largest land predators ever to exist. It possessed massive jaws, capable of delivering one of the strongest bites known in the animal kingdom. Its teeth were designed not merely to cut flesh, but to crush bone. Despite its fearsome reputation, scientists continue debating aspects of its behavior. Some evidence suggests it was an active hunter. Other evidence indicates it may also have scavenged carcasses when opportunities arose. Like modern predators, it likely did whatever maximized its chances of survival. Not all dinosaurs were enormous. Many species remained relatively small. Some were no larger than chickens. Others occupied ecological roles similar to modern birds, mammals, and reptiles. The dinosaur world was far more diverse than the image of giant monsters often portrayed in popular culture. Dinosaurs lived in forests, deserts, coastal regions, and river valleys. They evolved countless strategies for survival. Some developed armor. Others evolved horns and defensive structures. One of the most famous examples is Triceratops. This large herbivore possessed 3 facial horns and an enormous bony frill protecting its neck. These features may have helped defend against predators, but they were also likely used in displays and competition between members of the same species. Evolution often favors traits that serve multiple purposes. Throughout the Mesozoic era, the age that included the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, dinosaurs continued adapting and diversifying. New species appeared while others disappeared. Ecosystems changed. Continents drifted apart. Climate patterns shifted. Yet dinosaurs remained dominant. For over 160 million years, they occupied the top positions in terrestrial ecosystems. For comparison, Homo sapiens have existed for only about 300,000 years. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for a span of time more than 500 times longer than our species has existed. One of the most remarkable developments during this era involved a group of small feathered dinosaurs. For many years, scientists believed feathers evolved exclusively in birds. Today, fossils reveal a different story. Numerous dinosaurs possessed feathers. Some used them for insulation. Others may have used them for display. Over time, certain species developed feathers suitable for gliding and eventually powered flight. From these animals emerged the first birds. This means that birds are not merely descendants of dinosaurs. In a scientific sense, birds are dinosaurs. When you see a sparrow perched on a branch or a pigeon walking through a city street, you are looking at the descendants of one of the most successful groups in Earth's history. The legacy of the dinosaurs is still with us. As the Cretaceous period progressed, dinosaur ecosystems reached extraordinary levels of diversity. Gigantic herbivores roamed the continents. Powerful predators hunted them. Flying reptiles soared through the skies. Flowering plants began spreading across the landscape. Life appeared vibrant and successful. Few signs suggested that disaster was approaching. Yet beneath the surface of this thriving world, events were unfolding that would change the course of evolution forever. An object was moving silently through space. For millions of years, it traveled unnoticed. Eventually, its path would intersect with Earth. The consequences would reshape the history of life. The age of the dinosaurs had lasted longer than any human civilization could imagine. It seemed unstoppable. But even the most successful groups are not guaranteed survival. In the next chapter, we will witness one of the most dramatic events in Earth's history. Chapter 6. The Day the Dinosaurs Died. For more than 160 million years, dinosaurs ruled the Earth. They survived changing climates, shifting continents, volcanic eruptions, and countless evolutionary challenges. They dominated forests, floodplains, deserts, and coastal regions across the globe. Generation after generation, dinosaurs thrived. Their reign was so long that had an observer watched Earth's history unfold in real time, it might have seemed as though the age of dinosaurs would last forever. But life on Earth has never stood still. Again and again, evolution has been shaped by catastrophe as much as by success. The same planet that nurtures life can also transform suddenly and violently. High above Earth, a massive asteroid traveled silently through space. It had likely spent millions of years orbiting the Sun. Its journey was ordinary by cosmic standards, yet its future path would intersect with our planet at precisely the wrong moment. The asteroid was enormous. Scientists estimate it measured roughly 10 to 15 kilometers across. That may not sound particularly large compared to a planet, but the energy released by such an impact would be almost unimaginable. As it approached Earth, there was no one to see it. No telescopes tracked its movement. No civilizations recorded its arrival. The dinosaurs continued their daily lives completely unaware of what was coming. Then, approximately 66 million years ago, the asteroid struck. The impact occurred near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Within seconds, one of the most destructive events in Earth's history was underway. The asteroid slammed into the planet at tremendous speed. The collision released more energy than billions of nuclear weapons. Rock beneath the impact site vaporized instantly. A crater nearly 200 kilometers wide formed in the Earth's crust. Today, scientists know this structure as the Chicxulub crater. The immediate devastation was immense. Everything near the impact site was destroyed almost instantly. Shockwaves radiated outward in every direction. Earthquakes shook the planet. Massive tsunamis swept across coastlines. Molten rock and debris were blasted high into the atmosphere. For organisms living nearby, survival was impossible. Yet the long-term consequences would prove even more significant. As enormous quantities of dust, ash, and vaporized material spread through the atmosphere, sunlight became blocked. The sky darkened. Days may have appeared like twilight. Weeks turned into months. Months may have stretched into years. Without sufficient sunlight, photosynthesis declined dramatically. Plants struggled to survive. As plant life suffered, the consequences spread throughout ecosystems. Herbivores lost their food sources. Predators lost their prey. food chains began collapsing. The disaster reached every corner of the planet. Many scientists compare the event to a global ecological shutdown. Life did not disappear completely, but entire ecosystems were thrown into crisis. Temperatures may have fallen significantly. Wildfires likely raged across vast regions. Acid rain may have altered lakes, rivers, and oceans. The world that dinosaurs had dominated for millions of years was changing with terrifying speed. Some animals survived the initial catastrophe. The real challenge was enduring the years that followed. Large animals faced particular difficulties. Gigantic herbivores required enormous amounts of food. When vegetation declined, many could no longer sustain themselves. Large predators suffered as prey populations collapsed. One by one, species disappeared. The extinction was not limited to dinosaurs. Many other groups suffered devastating losses as well. Marine reptiles vanished. Numerous species of plants disappeared. Entire branches of life's evolutionary tree were cut away. Scientists estimate that roughly 75% of all species on Earth became extinct during this event. It was one of the 5 great mass extinctions in the history of life. The age of dinosaurs had come to an end. Yet the extinction was not absolute. Some creatures survived. Small animals often had important advantages. They required less food. Many could hide underground, in burrows, or in sheltered environments. Some fed on seeds, insects, or other resources that remained available even as ecosystems collapsed. Among these survivors were small mammals. For much of the dinosaur era, mammals had lived in the shadows. They were generally small and occupied limited ecological roles. Dinosaurs dominated most major habitats, leaving mammals relatively little room to expand. For millions of years, mammals remained secondary players in Earth's ecosystems. The asteroid changed that. As dinosaur populations disappeared, ecological opportunities opened across the planet. Habitats that had once been controlled by giant reptiles suddenly became available. Surviving mammals began diversifying. Natural selection favored new adaptations. Different species evolved to exploit different environments. Some became larger. Others specialized in climbing, digging, swimming, or running. The world was entering a new chapter. Not all dinosaurs vanished, however. One group survived. The feathered descendants of small theropod dinosaurs endured the catastrophe and continued evolving. Today, we know them as birds. Every eagle, sparrow, penguin, and owl represents a surviving branch of the dinosaur family tree. In that sense, dinosaurs never disappeared completely. Their legacy still fills the skies. The extinction event also left clues that scientists would not fully understand until millions of years later. For generations, paleontologists puzzled over the sudden disappearance of dinosaurs from the fossil record. Why had such successful animals vanished? For much of the 20th century, no clear answer existed. Then, researchers discovered unusual layers of rock dating to approximately 66 million years ago. These layers contained elevated concentrations of iridium, a chemical element relatively rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. The evidence suggested an extraterrestrial impact. Further discoveries strengthened the case. Eventually, Scientists identified the buried Chicxulub crater beneath the Yucatan Peninsula. The mystery was solved. A cosmic collision had altered the course of life on Earth. The story serves as a powerful reminder that evolution is not driven solely by competition and adaptation. Chance also plays a role. Had the asteroid missed Earth, dinosaurs might have continued dominating terrestrial ecosystems for millions of years longer. Mammals may never have risen to prominence. Human beings might never have appeared. Our own existence is linked in part to an event that occurred long before humans existed. The asteroid did not create humanity, but it reshaped the world in ways that made our eventual evolution possible. In the aftermath of the extinction, Earth entered a period of recovery. Forests slowly returned, ecosystems rebuilt themselves. Life adapted once again. The planet had experienced catastrophe before, and it would experience catastrophe again, yet each time, survivors found new opportunities. Evolution continued. The age of giant reptiles was over. The age of mammals was about to begin. Small, furry creatures that had once lived in the shadows would now inherit the earth. And from their descendants would emerge whales, elephants, horses, primates, and eventually ourselves. The next chapter of life's story was ready to unfold. Chapter 7. The Rise of Mammals. When the asteroid struck Earth 66 million years ago, it ended one of the greatest eras in the history of life. The dinosaurs had dominated the planet for more than 160 million years. Their extinction left ecosystems shattered and countless ecological niches suddenly empty. Yet life has a remarkable ability to recover. As forests slowly returned and food chains rebuilt themselves, a new group of animals began expanding into opportunities that had previously been unavailable. These animals were mammals. For much of the age of dinosaurs, mammals had remained small and relatively inconspicuous. Many were no larger than modern mice. They lived in burrows, climbed trees, hunted insects, and avoided the giant reptiles that dominated the landscape. Their world existed largely in the shadows, but now the shadows were gone. The extinction of the dinosaurs opened the door to a new age, an age that would belong to mammals. Mammals possessed several characteristics that helped them succeed. Unlike reptiles, they were warm-blooded, allowing them to maintain a stable body temperature regardless of environmental conditions. Most had fur, which provided insulation. They produced milk to nourish their young, giving offspring a better chance of survival. Many mammals also possessed relatively large brains compared to their body size, allowing for more flexible behavior and problem-solving abilities. These traits had evolved long before the asteroid impact, but after the extinction they became especially valuable. Over millions of years, mammals diversified at an astonishing rate. Some adapted to life in the trees, others became runners of the open plains. Some returned to the oceans, others evolved into predators. The variety of forms that emerged was extraordinary. The Earth was once again becoming a world of giants. Among the most remarkable developments was the rise of large herbivorous mammals. Animals similar to modern horses, rhinos, and elephants gradually evolved. Many occupied ecological roles once held by dinosaurs. The disappearance of giant reptiles had not eliminated the need for large plant-eating animals. Instead, mammals evolved to fill those roles. The ancestors of horses provide an excellent example of evolution in action. The earliest horses looked nothing like the animals we know today. They were small creatures, no larger than dogs, with multiple toes on each foot. They lived in forests and fed on soft vegetation. Over millions of years, changing climates transformed many forests into open grasslands. Natural selection favored individuals capable of running efficiently across these new environments. Gradually, horses evolved longer legs, larger bodies, and a single hoof on each foot. The modern horse is the result of countless small evolutionary changes accumulated over immense spans of time. Whales tell an even more remarkable story. Today, they are among the largest animals ever to live. Yet their ancestors once walked on land. Around 50 million years ago, certain mammals living near rivers and coastlines began spending increasing amounts of time in the water. Some hunted fish and aquatic prey. Over generations, natural selection favored traits that improved swimming. Limbs gradually transformed into flippers. Bodies became streamlined. Nostrils migrated toward the top of the head, eventually forming blowholes. The descendants of these land mammals became whales. Their evolution demonstrates one of the most important lessons in biology. Evolution does not move toward a predetermined goal. Instead, organisms adapt to changing circumstances. A land mammal can become a sea creature if environmental conditions favor that transition. The history of life is filled with such surprising transformations. As mammals spread across the globe, Earth itself continued changing. Continents drifted toward their modern positions. Mountains rose, oceans shifted, climate patterns evolved. These environmental changes created new challenges and opportunities. Some mammals adapted to tropical forests. Others thrived in deserts. Still others became specialists in cold northern environments. Among the many groups of mammals emerging during this time were the primates. The earliest primates evolved approximately 55 million years ago. Many lived in trees and possessed characteristics that would later prove important. They had forward-facing eyes that provided depth perception. Their hands could grasp branches. Their brains gradually became larger and more complex. These adaptations helped them navigate life in forest canopies. At the time, they were simply one group among many. Yet their descendants would eventually change the world. For tens of millions of years, primates diversified into numerous forms. Some remained small, others became larger. Different species adapted to different environments. Monkeys appeared. Apes evolved later. The evolutionary lineage that would eventually lead to humans was beginning to take shape. Meanwhile, another dramatic chapter of Earth's history was unfolding. The planet entered a period of long-term cooling. Temperatures gradually declined. Antarctica became increasingly isolated and covered with ice. Global climate patterns shifted. Eventually, vast ice sheets began advancing across large portions of the northern hemisphere. The ice ages had begun. The term Ice Age often brings to mind a world completely covered in snow. In reality, the situation was more complex. Huge glaciers expanded and retreated repeatedly over hundreds of thousands of years. Some regions became frozen landscapes. Others remained grasslands, forests, or deserts. The climate fluctuated dramatically. Species were forced to adapt, migrate, or disappear. Many mammals flourished during these changing conditions. Among the most famous were the mammoths. Closely related to modern elephants, mammoths roamed grasslands stretching across Europe, Asia, and North America. Their thick fur and layers of fat helped them survive cold environments. For thousands of years, they were among the dominant large animals of the Ice Age world. They shared these environments with giant bison, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, and numerous other impressive creatures. The Ice Age ecosystems were rich and diverse, yet they also presented constant challenges. Changing temperatures altered habitats. Glaciers advanced and retreated. Food sources shifted. Survival required adaptability. Throughout this period, one branch of the primate family tree was undergoing especially significant changes. In Africa, certain ape-like ancestors began evolving characteristics that set them apart from other primates. They spent increasing amounts of time moving across the ground. Their bodies changed. Their behavior changed. Their brains slowly grew larger. These developments would eventually lead to a completely new type of animal. An animal capable of creating tools, controlling fire, building civilizations, and studying the history of life itself. But that story still lay in the future. For now, the world remained a planet of mammals. Whales ruled the oceans. Herds of grazing animals crossed vast plains. Predators stalked their prey. Primates moved through forests and grasslands. Life continued evolving, adapting, and diversifying. The extinction that had once seemed catastrophic had opened the door to an entirely new era. The age of mammals had transformed Earth. Yet among all the species now living on the planet, one lineage was beginning a journey unlike any other. A journey that would eventually lead to art, language, science, and civilization. A journey that would produce a species capable of asking where it came from. In the next chapter, we will follow that lineage and explore the final stage of our story, the rise of humanity itself. Chapter 8. The Human Story. For more than 4 billion years, life on Earth evolved without humans. The first cells appeared in ancient oceans. Complex organisms emerged. Plants transformed the continents. Dinosaurs rose and fell. Mammals inherited the world. Throughout all these immense stretches of time, evolution continued without any predetermined destination. There was no plan, no final goal, no guarantee that intelligent life would ever appear. And yet, through countless generations of change, one branch of the primate family tree began a remarkable journey. It is the story of our own origins. To find its beginnings, we must return to Africa several million years ago. At that time, the world looked very different. Forests covered large regions of the continent, but changing climates were beginning to alter the landscape. Some areas became more open, creating grasslands and savannas where trees were less abundant. For primates adapted to life in the forest canopy, these environmental changes presented new challenges. Certain populations spent increasing amounts of time on the ground. Over many generations, natural selection favored traits that improved survival in these new environments. One of the most important changes involved movement. Most primates moved on all fours. Some of our ancestors gradually became more efficient at walking upright. This form of movement, known as bipedalism, would become one of the defining characteristics of the human lineage. Walking on two legs offered several advantages. It freed the hands for carrying food and tools. It allowed individuals to see farther across tall grasslands. It may also have improved energy efficiency during long journeys. The transition did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually over millions of years. Among the earliest known members of the human family tree was a group known as Australopithecus. These ancient relatives lived in Africa between roughly 4 and 2 million years ago. They walked upright but still retained many characteristics suited for climbing. Their brains were relatively small compared to modern humans, yet they represented a crucial step in our evolutionary history. One of the most famous Australopithecus fossils is known as Lucy. Discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, Lucy provided important evidence that upright walking evolved long before large human brains. She stood only a little over a meter tall, yet her skeleton revealed a creature already adapted to life on two legs. For millions of years, Australopithecus and related species survived in changing African environments. Then, around 2.4 million years ago, a new type of human ancestor appeared. Scientists call this species Homo habilis. The name means handyman. Homo habilis possessed a somewhat larger brain than earlier ancestors and is associated with some of the oldest known stone tools. These tools were simple by modern standards. Many consisted of rocks deliberately shaped to create sharp edges. Yet their significance cannot be overstated. Tools allowed early humans to access new food sources, process animal carcasses, and interact with their environment in entirely new ways. Technology had entered the story of life. The pace of change accelerated. Around 1.9 million years ago, another species emerged. Homo erectus. This was one of the most successful human ancestors ever to live. Homo erectus possessed a larger brain, a more human-like body, and the ability to travel long distances. Unlike earlier species, Homo erectus expanded far beyond Africa. Groups spread into Asia and parts of Europe, becoming the first humans to inhabit multiple continents. Evidence also suggests that Homo erectus learned to control fire. Few discoveries in human history would prove more important. Fire provided warmth during cold nights. It offered protection from predators. It allowed food to be cooked, making nutrients easier to digest. It created gathering places where individuals could interact and cooperate. For countless generations, the glow of fire illuminated the lives of our ancestors. As hundreds of thousands of years passed, different human species continued evolving. Some populations adapted to specific environments, others disappeared. The human family tree became increasingly complex. At various points in history, several human species lived simultaneously. Modern humans were not alone. One of the most famous of these relatives was the Neanderthal. Neanderthals evolved in Europe and parts of Western Asia. They were powerfully built and well adapted to cold climates. For many years, they were portrayed as primitive and unintelligent. Modern research paints a very different picture. Neanderthals made sophisticated tools. They hunted large animals. They cared for injured members of their communities. There is evidence that they created symbolic objects and perhaps even art. Far from being crude cavemen, they were capable and adaptable humans. For thousands of years, Neanderthals shared the world with another species, our own, Homo sapiens. The first Homo sapiens appeared in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. At first, they were simply one human species among several. Nothing guaranteed their future success. Yet Homo sapiens possessed characteristics that would ultimately prove transformative. Their brains supported increasingly complex language. They developed sophisticated social structures. They shared information across generations with remarkable efficiency. Knowledge accumulated. Ideas spread. Innovation accelerated. Around 70,000 years ago, many researchers believe human behavior underwent significant changes. Art became more common. Tools grew increasingly advanced. Trade networks expanded. People developed new ways of communicating and cooperating. The exact causes remain debated, but the consequences are clear. Human societies became extraordinarily adaptable. Groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa and spreading across the world. They entered the Middle East. They moved into Europe and Asia. Eventually, they reached Australia. Later, humans crossed into the Americas. Over thousands of years, people adapted to deserts, forests, mountains, grasslands, and frozen northern environments. No other large animal achieved such global success. As humans spread, many other human species disappeared. Neanderthals vanished. So did several other relatives. The reasons remain complex and are still studied today. Competition may have played a role. Environmental changes likely contributed as well. In fact, many people today carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA within their genomes. The human story is not one of complete replacement. It is also a story of connection. By around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age was ending. Glaciers retreated. Climate patterns stabilized. In various parts of the world, humans began developing agriculture. Plants were cultivated. Animals were domesticated. Permanent settlements appeared. Civilizations would eventually follow. Yet those developments belong to another story. Our focus has been something larger, the story of life itself. From the perspective of deep time, human history occupies only a tiny fraction of Earth's past. If the entire history of life were compressed into a single year, modern humans would appear only during the final minutes of December 31st. Everything we call recorded history would occupy the last few seconds before midnight. And yet, despite our brief existence, we have achieved something extraordinary. We are the first known species capable of understanding the story of life. We have uncovered fossils buried in ancient rocks. We have traced our ancestry through DNA. We have reconstructed events that occurred billions of years before our species existed. Life has become aware of itself. That realization may be one of the most remarkable outcomes of evolution. The first cells that appeared in ancient oceans could not have imagined forests, dinosaurs, whales, or human beings. Yet every living thing on Earth is connected through an unbroken chain stretching back billions of years. The story of life is not a collection of separate stories. It is one story. A story of change, a story of survival, a story of adaptation, a story that began with microscopic organisms in ancient seas and eventually produced creatures capable of wondering where they came from. And that brings us to the end of our journey. From a young planet of fire and stone to a world filled with extraordinary diversity, life has transformed Earth again and again. Countless species have appeared, countless species have vanished. Yet through every extinction, every challenge, and every triumph, life endured. For more than 4 billion years, evolution shaped the living world. And today, every organism, from the smallest bacterium to the largest whale, carries a piece of that ancient history within it. The story of life on Earth is the longest story ever told, and we are its latest chapter.